Fresh Fields was the ultimate 80s feel-good sitcom, but nearly 40 years later, the reality has left a trail of tragedy and heartbreak. From bodies found days after passing to careers destroyed by bitter resentment, these actors today is a far cry from their polished TV personas. Look closely at these faces, because the truth behind these missing faces is far darker than any sitcom script. Anton Rogers as William Fields. Anton Rogers was born on January 10, 1933, in London, England. At 51 years old, he played William Fields, the husband of Hester and the father in the household in Freshfields. Across 27 episodes, he portrayed a man trying to stay composed while everyday family life kept slipping out of control. That calm, controlled image came from a very different upbringing. During World War II, his family was evacuated from London to Wisbech. His father worked printing ration books and permits, and that strict, disciplined environment pushed Rogers toward structure from an early age. By 14, he was already performing on stage, and by his early 20s, he had trained at both Italia Conti Academy and LAMDA, two of the most demanding drama schools in Britain. It gave him technical strength, but it also meant years of constant pressure to prove himself in a competitive industry. That pressure followed him into his marriage. He married ballet dancer Morna Watson in 1959, and they had 2 children, but the relationship slowly broke down over time. His work schedule was relentless. Stage performances, television filming, and film roles like Scrooge, 1970, and The Day of the Jackal, 1973, kept him away for long periods. When he later married actress Elizabeth Garvey, they tried to build something stronger by working together, touring and performing readings across the UK. But even then, the pattern didn't fully change. By the time he reached the peak of his television success with May to December, 1989 to 1994, the cost was already clear. He was diagnosed with mesothelioma. It progressively damaged his lungs and reduced his ability to work. The change was visible. Roles became fewer, appearances stopped, and his daily life became focused on managing the illness. Even as audiences continued to see him in past work like Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, 1988, his own world had narrowed significantly. The illness wore him down over time, limiting both his energy and independence. Anton Rogers passed away on December 1, 2007, at the age of 74 in Reading, Berkshire, due to heart failure following his illness. He spent his final years in Whitchurch-on-Thames, living quietly away from the industry he had been part of for over 50 years. His estimated net worth was around $3 million, built through decades of consistent work. Anne Beach as Sonia Barrett. Anne Beach was born on June 7, 1938, in Wolverhampton, England. At 46 years old, she played Sonia Barrett, the neighbor living next door to the Fields family in Freshfields. She was often the one who unintentionally pushed situations further. That role was built on her real life from the start. At just 16, she earned a scholarship to RADA, one of the most prestigious acting schools in the UK, a sign of clear talent at a young age. By 1960, she was already performing in major stage productions like Billy Liar at the Cambridge Theatre and working with Theatre Workshop at the Royal Stratford East. Those early years built a strong foundation, but they also set a high expectation. That success became more noticeable in her personal life. She married director Francis Coleman in 1966, and together they had 2 daughters. But acting rarely provided steady income. Some years brought consistent roles, others didn't, and that financial uncertainty created ongoing tension at home. Bills, responsibilities, and long filming hours added pressure, and those pressures didn't stay separate. They became part of daily life, shaping the tone of the marriage over time. At the same time, she faced a different kind of struggle within her career. Casting directors often placed her in similar roles, quirky, secondary women, which limited her opportunities to take on more complex characters. Even as she continued working through the 1980s and 1990s, that pattern didn't change significantly. Anne Beach passed away on March 9, 2017, at the age of 79 in the United Kingdom after a short illness. Her death came after decades of steady work across stage and television. Her estimated net worth was around $1.5 million, reflecting a long career built on persistence rather than major breakthroughs. Julia Mackenzie as Hester Fields. Julia Mackenzie was born on February 17, 1941, in Enfield, Middlesex, England. At 43 years old, she played Hester Fields, the warm, patient wife at the center of Freshfields. That role didn't just carry the show, it defined it, because Hester was the one holding everything together while everything around her quietly fell apart. And that same image followed her into real life. In 1971, she married American actor-director Jerry Hart, and unlike many of her co-stars, her marriage lasted decades without scandal. But that didn't mean it was easy. While starring in productions like Guys and Dolls in 1982, which earned her an Olivier Award, and later Sweeney Todd in 1993, her career demanded constant discipline. She had to maintain a public image of grace, stability, and control at all times. That pressure didn't explode. It stayed, quietly, year after year. It showed in the way she approached her work later on. When she took over the role of Miss Marple in 2009, replacing an already established actress, the scrutiny was immediate. Viewers had strong opinions. Critics compared every detail, and she had to prove herself all over again, despite decades of experience. At the same time, she continued working in projects like Cranford and The Casual Vacancy, maintaining a level of output that most actors her age had already stepped away from. That endurance became even more personal in 2018 when her husband Jerry Hart passed away after nearly 50 years of marriage. It was a quiet loss, but a significant one. She didn't retreat, didn't disappear. She kept working, continuing appearances on stage and screen, including the film Alleluia in 2023. It wasn't about chasing success anymore. It was about continuing a life that had always been built around performance and commitment. As of 2026, Julia Mackenzie is 85 years old and remains active in the entertainment world, one of the last central figures from Freshfields still working. Her estimated net worth is around $10 million, built across more than 5 decades of theater, television, and film. Fanny Rowe as Nancy Penrose. Fanny Rowe was born on June 26, 1913, in Preston, Lancashire, England. At 71 years old, she played Nancy Penrose, the sharp, traditional mother in Freshfields. Her calm but cutting delivery gave the show a sense of realism, especially in family scenes where tension felt uncomfortably familiar. That sense of control on screen came from a lifetime of discipline. She was the daughter of a clergyman and grew up in a strict household. She was performing with the Marlowe Society in Cambridge, then moving into West End productions by 1936. By the early 1950s, she had built a steady reputation, winning the Clarence Derwent Award in 1951 for her stage work in Who Goes There. Even so, she was never the headline name. That feeling followed her into her personal life. She married actor Clive Morton in 1954, but the timing meant they had already spent years focused on their careers. They never had children, and as the years passed, that absence became more noticeable. People who knew her described a routine that revolved around work and reading, but also long stretches of silence. The contrast between her composed on-screen presence and the stillness of her private life became more apparent as she aged. Then her health began to decline. She was diagnosed with cancer, and unlike many public figures, she chose not to speak about it openly. Even while taking on later roles, including her appearance in After Henry in 1988, she was already dealing with the physical toll of the illness. The progression was steady but unforgiving, limiting her energy and forcing her to reduce her work. Fanny Rowe passed away on July 31, 1988, at the age of 75 in London. Her death came shortly after her final television work, marking the end of a career that had lasted more than 50 years. Her estimated net worth was around $800,000, built over decades of consistent work, reflecting a life dedicated to acting even without the global recognition she once hoped for. Debbie Cumming as Emma. Debbie Cumming was born around 1967 in the United Kingdom. At about 17 years old, she played Emma, the teenage daughter in Fresh Fields. Her role added a younger perspective to the show, making the family dynamic feel more complete and grounded. Her early start came at a time when British television was highly competitive, especially for young actors. As a teenager, she moved quickly between roles, appearing in series like Poldark, 1975, and later That's My Boy, building experience across different genres. At just 17, balancing education and filming schedules meant long working days and constant pressure to perform. Each role carried the weight of proving she could stay in the industry. That pressure became clearer as she moved into her early 20s. Despite appearing in projects such as The Year of the Bodyguard, 1982, and Sorrel and Son, 1984, she didn't receive the kind of breakthrough role that could redefine her career. Casting patterns often placed her in similar supporting roles, limiting her visibility. Over time, that pattern shaped her decisions. The acting industry required constant auditions, uncertainty, and relocation, and by her late 20s, she began stepping away. Instead of continuing to chase roles with no clear progression, she chose stability. It was a quiet shift, but one that marked a clear end to her time in front of the camera. As of 2026, Debbie Cumming is around 59 years old and lives a private life away from the entertainment industry. She has not returned to acting in recent decades. Her story stands out not because of a dramatic fall, but because she chose to leave while most others were still trying to stay. Ballard Berkeley as Guy Penrose. Ballard Berkeley was born on August 6, 1904, in Tunbridge Wells, Kent, England. At 80 years old, he played Guy Penrose, the aging, slightly out-of-touch father in Fresh Fields. His presence added a quiet layer of humor and nostalgia, the kind that only someone with decades of life behind them could deliver so naturally. But that calm, familiar face on screen came after a very long wait. Berkeley didn't become widely recognized until much later in life, even though he had been acting since the 1930s. He spent decades taking small roles, often playing background officers or minor characters in films like In Which We Serve, 1942, and Stage Fright, 1950. Even his now iconic role as Major Gowan in Fawlty Towers came when he was already in his 70s. That delay shaped his personal life more than people realized. He married Dorothy Long back in 1929, but years of unstable work, low income, and constant uncertainty created distance between them. Acting wasn't a steady profession for him. There were long stretches with little to no work, and money was often tight. Berkeley spent much of his life moving from role to role, trying to stay afloat. His health also began to decline as he continued working into his 80s. Even while appearing in projects like Fresh Fields and recording for the radio series Lenin of the Rovers, his physical condition was weakening. Simple tasks became harder, and the energy required for acting was no longer easy to maintain. Still, he kept going, finishing recordings and appearances, even as his body was clearly struggling to keep up. Ballard Berkeley passed away on January 16, 1988, at the age of 83 in Westminster, London, due to bronchopneumonia. He died shortly after recording only 2 episodes of Lenin of the Rovers, leaving the role unfinished. His net worth was estimated at around $1 million, built over decades of steady work. And in the end, what stands out most isn't just his roles, but how long he kept going before the world finally saw him. Daphne Oxenford as Miss Denham. Daphne Oxenford was born on October 31, 1919, in North Finchley, London, England. At 65 years old, she played Miss Denham, an elderly, unmarried woman and close acquaintance in Fresh Fields. It was a small part, but her voice and delivery gave this older female figure a quiet authority that made her scenes stand out. That voice had already been part of millions of lives long before the show. From 1950 to 1971, she was the voice behind BBC's Listen with Mother, opening each broadcast with the line, "Are you sitting comfortably?" a phrase repeated daily for over 20 years. But even with that recognition, she was rarely seen as a leading actress. She moved between projects like Coronation Street in the early 1960s and Man About the House in 1973. People knew her voice instantly, yet her face and name were often overlooked. That gap became something she quietly struggled with. She had originally trained as a classical pianist, but she left it behind for acting, hoping for something bigger. Instead, she spent decades portraying older women, widows, or unmarried ladies, building a career that stretched over 50 years without ever fully breaking through. Even as she appeared in series like The Children of Green Knowe, 1986, as Mrs. Old Knowe, an elderly house owner, and later Midsummer Murders in the 2000s as a grandmother, the pattern remained the same: consistent work, limited recognition. Her personal life brought more stability, but also quiet loss. She married David Marshall in 1951, and they remained together for over 50 years until his death in 2003. After that, her world became smaller. She moved to Denville Hall, a care home for actors, where many retired performers spent their final years. By then, she had already stepped back from most of her work, and the long career that once kept her constantly moving had slowed into stillness. Daphne Oxenford passed away on December 21, 2012, at the age of 93. She died peacefully at Denville Hall, far from the studios and stages that had defined her life. Her estimated net worth was around $1.2 million, built from decades of steady work across radio, television, and theater. And in the end, what people remembered most wasn't a single role, but a voice they had heard for years, without always knowing who it belonged to. Charlotte Barker as Miss Turner. Charlotte Barker was born in 1962 in Willesden, London, England. At 22 years old, she played Miss Turner, the polite but slightly distant schoolteacher in Freshfields. It was a small role, but it added a subtle layer of realism to the show, showing a younger generation quietly observing the chaos around them. That calm presence hid something much heavier: her last name. She was the daughter of Ronnie Barker, one of Britain's most iconic comedians, and that came with pressure from the very beginning. While she trained seriously, studying at Guildhall and even working in Australia, people didn't see Charlotte the actress, they saw Ronnie Barker's daughter. Even when she earned praise on stage in Stepping Out in 1984, which won Best Comedy at the Evening Standard Theatre Awards, the conversation often circled back to her father. That pressure didn't disappear as her career grew. She appeared in films like Wish You Were Here, 1987, and television roles in Miss Marple, at Bertram's Hotel and Screaming, 1992, building a steady resume. But something shifted in 1998 when her father wrote a play specifically for her, titled Mum. Instead of becoming a breakthrough moment, it turned into a difficult experience. Critics described the play as a theatrical embarrassment, and although they defended her performance, the damage was done. After that, her acting appearances became less frequent. She chose a different direction, eventually shifting into business rather than continuing to fight for roles that always seemed tied to her surname. It was more like walking away from a game where the rules were never entirely fair. As of 2026, Charlotte Barker is 64 years old and lives a private life away from the entertainment industry. She no longer actively pursues acting, focusing instead on her work outside the spotlight. Her career reflects a career that had strong beginnings and critical respect, even if it never fully escaped the shadow that defined it from the start. Geraldine Gardner as Miss Henshaw. Geraldine Gardner was born on June 23, 1950, in Windsor, Berkshire, England. At around 35 years old, she played Miss Henshaw, a female office worker in Freshfields. It was a short appearance, but the way she delivered lines made the character feel real, not just someone passing through a scene. But her career was never as simple as it looked. She changed her name more than once, first from Trudy Gardner to Trudy Van Dorn, then to Geraldine Gardner, just to fit into the industry. She worked constantly, appearing in shows like The Benny Hill Show, Are You Being Served, and The Avengers, often in small roles that required quick impact. At the same time, she had real stage talent, performing in major productions like A Chorus Line in London's West End, and later landing the role of Bombalurina in the original Cats. Her personal life became more complicated when she married Christopher Swan in 1985. Shortly after, she gave birth to twins, and that moment, which should have been joyful, turned into something much darker. She suffered from severe postpartum depression, and it hit hard. At the same time, she was already struggling with addiction, moving in and out of rehabilitation programs while trying to hold on to her career. The pressure of motherhood, combined with her mental health and unstable work, created a situation that quickly spiraled beyond control. The situation worsened rapidly in early 1987. Just weeks after giving birth, her condition became critical. The exhaustion, emotional instability, and isolation pushed her to a breaking point. Those around her later described it as a sudden collapse rather than a gradual one, which made the outcome even more shocking. Geraldine Gardner died on January 9, 1987, at the age of 36 in West Mercia, Essex, after walking into the sea and dying from hypothermia. Her death was ruled a suicide, closely linked to her postpartum depression and ongoing struggles with addiction. It happened just weeks after becoming a mother. There was no recovery, no second chance, just a life that ended at the exact moment it should have been beginning again. Zulema Deeney as Mrs. Fielder. Zulema Deeney was born on May 21, 1934, in Paddington, London, England. At 51 years old, she played Mrs. Fielder, a married woman and neighbor within the social circle in Freshfields. Though she appeared briefly, her portrayal of a composed but observant wife added another layer to the everyday relationships surrounding the main family. Her career looked steady on the surface, but her personal life told a far more difficult story. She went through 2 marriages, and both ended painfully. The first was with an actor known for intense jealousy, which often led to arguments and emotional strain. The second, with a businessman, brought a different kind of pressure: control over finances. Money decisions were no longer hers, and that imbalance slowly affected her independence. Even while continuing to work in productions like the BBC television Shakespeare, 1978, and later appearing in the film Willow, 1988, she was dealing with situations at home that made stability almost impossible. Those experiences began to shape her later years. After the breakdown of her marriages, her work became less frequent, and the financial impact became more visible. She struggled to maintain consistent income. Even though she had trained at the Royal Central School of Speech and Drama and performed in West End productions like Tonight at 8:30, the industry didn't guarantee security. Over time, she stepped away from regular acting, moving into smaller voice work projects, which provided limited income compared to her earlier years. Zulema Deeney passed away on September 16, 2022, at the age of 88 in Wandsworth, London. Her death marked the end of a career that had spanned theater, television, and film, even if it never reached lasting financial security. Her net worth was $500,000, but it reflected a life where steady work did not always translate into long-term stability, leaving behind a story shaped as much by personal struggle as by performance. John Arthur as John. John Arthur was born around 1945 in the United Kingdom. At about 40 years old, he played John, a working man and acquaintance within the everyday social circle in Freshfields. His role reflected a grounded, ordinary man, helping the series feel closer to real life rather than just scripted comedy. His path into acting was not sudden success, but years of repetition and discipline. After leaving drama school in Birmingham in 1970, he spent nearly 10 years moving between repertory theaters across England, performing in dozens of roles every year. In 1973 alone, he worked in weekly repertory, playing different characters, often murderers, in a constant rotation of thriller plays. That pace meant long hours, low pay, and constant travel between small venues like village halls, schools, and even prisons. By 1977, he joined Alan Ayckbourn's company in Scarborough, where he performed in 9 new plays over 3 years, including Taking Steps and Sisterly Feelings. It built his skill, but it also meant years of hard work without wide recognition. That same pattern continued into his television career. He appeared in series like The Bill and Doctor Who, along with sitcom roles such as Barbara, 1995, but most of these were supporting parts rather than leading roles. Even in film, including Thunderpants, 2002, and The Abduction Club, 2002, his presence remained consistent, but not widely known. Despite that, he continued working well into later life. From 2017 onward, he took on the role of Bishop Barry in Emmerdale, showing that even after more than 40 years in the industry, he was still active. At the same time, he returned to theater, performing with the Royal Shakespeare Company in productions like Love's Labour's Lost and Much Ado About Nothing between 2016 and 2017. In 2021, he won Best Actor awards at 2 film festivals for his role in the short film Fearfully Made, proving that recognition came, just much later than expected. As of 2026, John Arthur is around 81 years old and has largely stepped back from acting, living a quieter life after decades of continuous work. His story stands out not because of a single breakthrough, but because he kept going for over 50 years in an industry where most people give up much earlier. From laughter and everyday moments to real-life struggles and quiet endings, the cast of Fresh Fields has changed in ways few could have imagined. Some are still with us, others are gone, but their stories didn't end when the show did. So looking back at Fresh Fields then and now, which story surprised you the most? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more unforgettable cast updates.